Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Dirt Nap City, a show about interesting dead people. I'm Alex. I'm here with my friend Kelly. Hey, Kelly, how's it going today?
It's going pretty well, Alex. Good to see you, man.
Well, I got a good one for you today. This is somebody that I'm sure that you know. I don't even wonder about that. It's the most sports adjacent one I've done since Evel Knievel, but don't worry about it. I think it'll be fine. If you're a longtime listener of this program, you know that I'm a sports fan. Kelly, not so much. But it's not like you're not a fan. You just aren't as knowledgeable as I am, right?
I'm not a fan.
Oh, not a fan. Hate sports. Wow.
I don't hate it. I'm sort of indifferent to it.
Bunch of dudes running around trying to get a little ball into a little hole. Is that what basically how you feel about sports?
Yeah, I guess if it's a ball-based sport, yes. I mean, there's other things besides balls and holes.
Bunch of guys running around in skimpy outfits, trying to chase each other and get points on the board. Is that how you?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Or guys and gals. Let's be. It's 2023, Alex.
So you hate women's sports too?
I don't hate it. I'm indifferent to it.
Yeah. But anyways, I don't think that's going to matter here. I think the person that I chose is someone you're familiar with and someone you'll get a kick out of.
Sports adjacent.
Sports adjacent. So this man was born in 1918 in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Not really thought of as a Southerner, though, so don't let that mess you up. Died in 1995 in New York City and raised in Brooklyn, New York. I think the best clue I can give to this person is, in the 70s, everybody had, or 70s and 80s, everybody had their impressions, like their stock impressions that they did, right? So like everybody had a John Wayne, right? Did you have a John Wayne impression when you were growing up?
I sure did, Pilgrim.
There you go. And everybody had a Ronald Reagan, like, Will. That's all you had to do is say, Will. And Jack Nicholson, it's the World Series, man. Everybody had their impressions, and everybody had an impression of this guy too.
Okay, can I do it?
Sure, please.
This is Howard Cosell coming to you live from the ballpark.
That's right. That's
Did
right.
I get it?
Howard Cosell. That's right.
Wow. Sports adjacent.
Such a unique delivery that he had that everybody seemed to know who he was and be able to imitate him too. And most people didn't like the guy, right? Most people, when you brought up his name, would either roll their eyes or say, I hate that guy.
You mean most people that knew him or most people that didn't know him?
Most viewers, and especially people that knew him. People that knew him thought he was an ass. And he was pompous and he was arrogant and he was dismissive. And viewers on TV loved to hate him. Oh. He was somebody that was inaccessible. He didn't have much in common with the common man of the 70s who watched sports. And back in the 70s, I think sports viewing was primarily a male pursuit. And he covered sports like boxing and football that mostly men watched back then. And most blue-collar guy types really didn't like the guy.
Interesting.
Yet, he was one of the most popular people of definitely of the late 20th century. And if you grew up around when we did, so this is what you call my lane, everybody knew Howard Cosell and everybody had a take on Howard Cosell. And most people, that take was negative about Howard Cosell.
Would you say there's an equivalent of him today? And if so, who is it?
No, there's no equivalent of him today. I mean, Stephen A. Smith, do you know who that is?
I don't.
Okay. Well, so there's a guy on ESPN who's kind of a bloviator that just has an opinion about everything. And I think to this, we'll talk at the end about kind of legacy. I think he spawned these kind of folks that are kind of, everybody's got an opinion now. Way of covering sports, but there's nobody quite as polarizing today, and not only polarizing but as famous as Howard Cosell. Remember, this is the time when we only had 3 networks on television, and so everybody knew the guy. Monday Night Football was the number one show on television most of the time, and so everybody knew who this guy was. Did you remember him, right?
Sure. I can picture what he looks like. I mean, I knew the impression, right? And I remember it being a big impression that they would do on Saturday Night Live or do on, comedians would do that. But the big thing that I think that you're bringing up, and this is an interesting part of his legacy, I suppose, is before him, maybe most sports commentators were more neutral and just sort of telling it as they saw it versus commentating, right? So, and that's probably what's changed with news anchors as well. Is now news is a little bit more of an editorial thing than it used to be. Sports became a more editorial thing with Cosell.
I think you're exactly right. In fact, you say tell it. His thing was he tells it like it is. That was his kind of his catchphrase.
I remember that.
Tell
that
it
phrase.
like it is.
Tell it like it is.
I'll kind of be flipping into those bad impressions of him as we go, because it's impossible to kind of quote him without kind of doing an impression of him. So let me tell you about this guy. All right. He went to law school and became a lawyer, and his parents' last name was Cohen. But his grandfather's original name was Cosell. So he changed it back to his grandfather's original name while he was in law school. And somehow he had a sports radio show in the early 50s. He was on locally in Brooklyn while he was a lawyer.
He was a lawyer full time, and side hustle was a sports radio show on the radio.
He just did like a weekend show that hardly anybody listened to. And this is back when you could just get on the radio, and but he was still a lawyer, and this is the early 1950s. So he was, in his 30s already. And then one of his clients was the Little League of New York, and the president of ABC Radio, because I guess the show that he did was a local show, but ABC Radio's headquarters were also in New York. He said, "Hey, I think it'd be great if you could host a show about Little Leaguers, because they wanted a kind of a relationship with Little League baseball." So he would ask them to host a show with Little Leaguers. And that was his beginning of his relationship with ABC. ABC was the only network that he ever worked for.
That was Wide World of Sports, right?
No, that show was just a radio show about Little League.
No, but I mean, ABC is where Wide World of Sports was, I believe.
Yeah, that's true. In 1956, he quit law to become a full-time broadcaster. And he had another radio show he wanted to start a radio show called Speaking of Sports. And he came to ABC and he said, "Hey, can I do a show on national radio?" And they said, "Sure, if you can find a sponsor." So he had one of his relatives owned a shirt company, and he said, "Hey, you want to be a sponsor?" So the next thing you know, he had a sponsor, and he was on a show called Speaking of Sports, where he kind of gave opinions about sports. He worked that into doing the New York Mets was an expansion team in 1962. They had just started. And by then he worked his way into doing pre and post game shows for the New York Mets. So he was on his way. Well, around that time in the early 60s, he started covering a boxer named Cassius Clay. You know what I'm talking about there?
Muhammad Ali.
And so much like FDR is kind of a background character in a lot of our episodes, Muhammad Ali, who was
all the Roosevelts, really.
Right? Yeah, that's true. In this episode, even though Muhammad Ali is a far more consequential character in 20th century America, he's an integral part of the Howard Cosell story too. Huge part, but this isn't a story about Ali. It's a story about Howard Cosell, but Ali was much more, significant.
Well, the two of them were kind of associated with each other. Absolutely. They came up in the same time.
They kind of needed each other to be big. They really got along well in kind of an odd couple sort of way. When Cassius Clay when he changed his name, when he found Islam and changed his name to Muhammad Ali, a lot of sportscasters back then would not refer to him by his new name. And Howard Cosell was one of the first to refer to him by his own name, which shows respect, right?
Yep.
They got along very well. They had completely different personalities. I mean, we've got a white Jewish older guy from Brooklyn, and then you've got a young Ali from Louisville, which he was a fast talker and kind of had a rhyming scheme to his cadence, and completely different guys, but they really played off well. Howard Cosell also supported Ali when he refused to go into the military, when he refused to go to Vietnam. Howard Cosell supported him, which endeared him to Ali, but kind of turned him off to a lot of the general public as well. That was a very controversial position for a mainstream person to have.
Yeah.
He was also a supporter of the Olympic protest of Tommy Smith and John Carlos when they put up their fists for Black Power in 1968 in the Mexico City Olympics. And so, he came across as a liberal, broadcaster, where a lot of people, like you said earlier, didn't have positions. They didn't take political stances.
Right.
But already a lot of people kind of couldn't stand him anyway. So he didn't really lose a lot of viewers. And like I said, every time somebody would be critical, he would say, "I'm just telling it like it is." At that time, most play-by-play was right down the middle, like you said earlier. And the color commentary part was for the jocks. He was more of an intellectual person. He didn't bring a lot of the locker room talk to it. He was an intellectual. He used words that a lot of people couldn't understand. He used obscure kind of SAT words. There's a great clip. I couldn't find a great clean recording of it, but there's a great clip where he's asking Ali. Ali's about to fight somebody, and he said, "Are you worried about this fight coming up?" And Ali says, "No, I'll take on anybody, anywhere, anytime." And Howard Cosell says, "You're being rather truculent." And Ali says, "Well, whatever truculent is, if it's good, I'm that."
That's awesome. That's a great word too. I don't even know what that means. Truculent.
I think it means like aggressive and kind of just kind of aggro. His most famous call. Do you know what his most famous call? Like when you think of a famous sports call of Howard Cosell, do you know what?
I don't.
This would be George Foreman versus Joe Frazier, 1973.
So boxing was a big thing for him.
Boxing was a big thing. You want to hear this clip? You'll recognize it when I play it.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Angie Dundee, Ali's trainer, right next to me is saying it. You may hear him. Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier! The heavyweight champion is taking the mandatory 8 count, and Foreman is as poised as can be in a neutral corner.
Wow.
That was a big deal. Down goes Frazier. That was actually the first time Joe Frazier had ever been knocked down in his career. And George Foreman, who a lot of our listeners might know just as the guy that makes the grills,
right?
Was an upstart boxer. This was 1973, and it was a big deal
This is George Foreman Sr., not one of his 3 or 4 kids named George Foreman.
Right. Yeah, but that was a big deal to even knock down Joe Frazier. So you're right. He was known for boxing, and he loved boxing. But in 1982, there was some things that happened in boxing that really turned him off. There was a guy named Boom Boom Mancini. Do you remember Boom Boom Mancini?
Yeah, I know the name.
Yeah, and he fought a Korean fighter named Duk Kim, and actually killed him in the ring. The ref didn't stop the fight when he should have. There was a lot of controversy over that. And then 2 weeks later, Larry Holmes fought Randall Tex Cobb. These names ring a bell to you?
Larry Holmes does. I don't remember Randall Tex Cobb.
Randall Tex Cobb was kind of a tomato can, as they say in the boxing world. And this fight was at the Astrodome, and it shouldn't have ever been fought. Tex Cobb was not qualified to fight the heavyweight champion, but they needed a fight, and they got this guy, and he just got the pulp beat out of him. And Cosell was doing this fight. He was broadcasting this fight, and at some point during the fight, he just kind of stopped talking. Even he was just kind of just mailing it in, basically. And after the fight, he hung it up. He said, I can't be a witness to this sport anymore. These people are out here killing themselves. Nobody's killing each other. Nobody's stopping these fights, and this is barbaric. And I'm not going to be so he walked away in 1982. Said, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. And like I say, he was kind of the guy known for boxing, but that's the kind of clout he had, the kind of power he had, that he just walked away.
When you say tomato can, what do you mean by that?
Just a guy that's not very good. Just kind of a
is that a common term, like in boxing?
I've always heard that growing up about somebody being a tomato can. You like that?
No, I've never heard. I do like it, but I've never heard it. I guess I'm thinking back at all the times I've been called a tomato can now and didn't really realize it was an insult.
Oh, yeah. No, I think a tomato can is an easy opponent.
Okay.
So he didn't just do boxing, though. He was, ABC's lead guy. He did Monday Night Baseball. But he was the thing he was most known for besides boxing was Monday Night Football. So in 1970, the NFL decided they were going to put on games at night, and that was a big deal. To even think that people would want to watch football in the evening against primetime shows, and that was a big risk. And so he paired Howard Cosell with ex football player Don Meredith, who was kind of a homespun good old boy, and Frank Gifford, who was an ex player.
Kind of like Terry Bradshaw, a little bit of a Southern accent.
Yeah, Don Meredith.
Yeah, I remember.
Don, yeah.
Yeah.
But also kind of a partier. And just kind of wouldn't run in the same circles as Howard Cosell at all. And then Frank Gifford, who was an ex-player, but with very good voice and kind of down the middle, traditional commentator. And the thing is, the three of them clashed like you wouldn't believe. They fought on the air. They disagreed all the time. Don Meredith would kind of represent the everyman that was watching the show and telling Howard to shut up, or they didn't understand what he was saying. And then, Cosell would kind of put on his airs of everything and everyone was kind of beneath him, and Frank Gifford was just like, well, back to the game,
trying to keep the peace.
And this show was TV magic. It was frequently the number one show in the country. I think people didn't care much about the matchups, but they cared about what these guys were going to say next. It was just always good TV. They clearly didn't get along with each other, but it just made for TV magic. It was very kind of uncomfortable to watch at times, but also like you couldn't look away, right?
So sort of like Dirt Nap City.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they say about our chemistry. And he stayed on Monday Night Football until 1983. In 1983, he made some comments that some people took to be racist. I think when you look back, it probably wasn't, but it's still, this was kind of a sea change of culture. In 1983, people were starting to become more careful about the kind of things they said on the air. He was let go in 1983. He also broadcast the Battle of the Sexes. Do you know what the Battle of the Sexes was?
I don't. I've heard the term, but I don't know.
It was a tennis match between Billie Jean King, who was the best female tennis player, and Bobby Riggs, who was an older, has-been male tennis player, and also real arrogant and sexist. And he was, one of these guys in 1973, he could kind of go around saying that women's place is in the kitchen, and they don't belong on the tennis court. And so he was like in his 50s then, and he was playing the number one player in the world. And he said this was going to be easy. And they set it up at the Astrodome. They set up a tennis court, and it was this whole battle of the sexes. And He was called a male chauvinist pig. I think that was a term that was used a lot in the 70s, calling somebody a male chauvinist pig. And he just ate it up, this guy. And to give it kind of the gravitas that, a serious event would have, they had Howard Cosell broadcasted, even though he wasn't a tennis guy.
Who won the match?
Oh, Billie Jean King won the match.
Like by a lot?
Yeah, she beat him in straight sets, 6-4, 6-3, 6-3, and it was the winner got $100,000 of this match.
Wow.
And if I remember correctly, it kind of pitted men against women in the culture in America. Like all the guys seemed to be rooting for him, and all the women seemed to be rooting for Billie Jean King. And I don't think that would happen today. If some, asshole guy was playing, Serena Williams, I don't think it would be split between men and women on who people wanted to win. But this was the early 70s,
Yeah.
And we were trying to figure out, things like women's place in the work, women's roles in the workplace and at home, and as a culture, we were in a sea change.
Did Cosell commentate? Did he sort of have commentary to throw at it
regarding the cultural part of it?
Yeah.
I mean, I think just the fact that he announced it gave legitimacy. I think a lot of people at the time were saying it won't even be a contest. Women can't come close to men. And it was kind of a deal. And then even if they did, well, he's an old man and she's the best in the world or whatever. And it was almost a no-win situation. But I think just the fact that he announced it gave it the kind of legitimacy that Billie Jean King needed for this to, be a real event. And they took it very seriously. Like I said, though, he was criticized by a lot of people that he worked with. They called him an ass. That was probably the most thing that you'd hear, that he was just an ass. He was a jackass.
Yeah.
He was a shill. Pompous was another thing that you'd hear a lot. So the sportscaster Bob Costas gave an interview, and here's his story about his meeting with Howard Cosell.
I met him for the first time at the World Series in Baltimore, the Phillies and the Orioles at the old Memorial Stadium in 1983. He's wearing that hideous mustard yellow ABC blazer. He's brandishing a cigar about the size of a Louisville Slugger. And I say, "Mr. Cosell, my name is Bob Costas. It's a pleasure to meet you." And he goes, "I know who you are. You're the child who rhapsodizes about the infield fly rule. I'm sure you'll have a fine career." And he flicked the cigar ash and walked back into the booth. And my first thought is, this is the biggest schmuck I have ever encountered. But then in the next instant, I'm thinking, no, this is great. I got the full Howard Cosell treatment. And here we are. I got a story I'm telling some 40 years later. And I was always amused by Howard, because he was simultaneously a cartoon character, the character of Howard Cosell, but he was also a very consequential figure. He resented Al Michaels, he resented me and others that he couldn't easily dismiss as lightweights, because he wanted preeminence. And in a way, he had preeminence. He had a broad fame. Famously, when TV Guide really mattered, there was a TV Guide poll, and he won both favorite and least favorite sports broadcaster in the same poll.
Isn't it crazy?
Yeah, favorite. I mean, that he covered it all.
Yeah. He was a very polarizing figure, and it's really interesting that he was people's favorite and least favorite, and he could even be your favorite and least favorite within the same person. Like I remember, like you didn't like listening to him, but you almost were upset when he wasn't doing a game. You wanted to hear what Howard had to say about this.
Yeah. Now,
the thing that I remember the most about Howard Cosell was on December 8th, 1980. And December 8th, 1980 was the night that John Lennon was killed outside his apartment.
Yeah, in New York. Yeah.
And Monday Night Football was on, and a large portion of the country found out from Howard Cosell. It was a kind of a meaningless Patriots-Dolphins game, and here's what it sounded like.
Timeout is called. 3 seconds remaining. John Smith is on the line, and I don't care what's on the line, Howard. You have got to say what we know in the booth.
Yes, we have to say it. Remember, this is just a football game, no matter who wins or loses. An unspeakable tragedy confirmed to us by ABC News in New York City. John Lennon, outside of his apartment building on the west side of New York City, the most famous perhaps of all of the Beatles, shot twice in the back, rushed to Roosevelt Hospital, dead on arrival. Hard to go back to the game after that news flash, which in duty bound we had to take. Frank?
Indeed it is.
Yeah. How do you respond to that? Well, it looks like they're going to run a quarterback sneak here.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy, but that's how a lot of America, because it was the number one show on TV. It was before the news, but here's the thing is that, the only reason they found out about that was because an ABC employee happened to be at the same emergency room that night where John Lennon was brought. And so they had to scoop before the hospital had relayed the information. And Yoko Ono had actually asked the hospital to delay reporting it until she could tell Sean, her son, who was 5 years old at the time, and he was asleep. So she was going to tell him like in the morning, I guess. And she had asked the hospital not to release the information. But actually, NBC broke the news a few minutes before Howard Cosell did by breaking into the Tonight Show and announcing it. So, most of America was either watching the Tonight Show or watching Monday Night Football, and they found out that way. But that's when I think of my memories of Howard Cosell, that's the one I think that I remember the most, was learning about John Lennon that way. And he was a big fan too. I mean, a few years earlier, he had actually interviewed John Lennon during a Monday Night Football game, who came on, and they got along great. He really liked all the kind of youthful figures, even though he was a crusty old man himself. He kind of liked youth culture in the 70s. He himself, Howard Cosell, was a celebrity. There's no getting around that. And he thought he was as big as any other of the people that he covered. And he was on episodes of, The Odd Couple. You'd see him, show up, or he was actually in 3 Woody Allen movies. I don't know if you remember those, but there's a scene, there's a particularly good scene in the movie Bananas that involves Howard Cosell doing play-by-play for a lovemaking session.
Of course.
But he considered himself a journalist also. He had a show called Sports Beat that not a lot of people watched, but it did some of the hard-hitting journalism that a lot of people weren't doing back then. He was covering things like drugs in sports. Drugs were really common in sports. Recreational drugs, the NBA had a big cocaine problem. Nobody was really talking about that. He kind of put that at front and center. He talked about apartheid when nobody was talking about it. This show, Sports Beat, had low ratings, but it was critically acclaimed. It won a lot of Emmys, and it was the kind of thing that some people like to talk about. Some people, though, even now, have the idea, just shut up and dribble, shut up and play. We don't want politics involved in sports. And I don't think personally you can take politics out of sports. I mean, our sports takes place as part of our cultural landscape, and you can't just isolate it.
And just so everybody knows, because we started this episode by calling me out for not being a big sports fan. You are, right? You've always followed sports. You've always followed Texas sports, Houston, the University of Texas. You come to a lot of football games. You make an effort to do that. What is it that you get out of sports?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I like it because you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it's unscripted, and anything can happen. Upsets happen all the time, which are, I find that inspiring. I find people working for a common goal to be really inspiring. I'm obsessed with kind of coaching successes and failures, and try to apply that to things like leadership and teamwork. And so I think it's a metaphor for a lot of things that go on in regular life. And at the end, it's really inconsequential in terms of, like, it's just a game. That's what I like about it the best, is the stakes relative to everything else are low, but in that moment, it's the most important thing going on. And I love when my heart gets racing and to see what the outcome is. And yeah, I like sports.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I want to go back just real quick to say, it's not that I don't enjoy watching sports. I do, exactly for those reasons that you stated. It can be really exciting. It's unpredictable. People make amazing, sort of that amazing physicality of what some people can do, and the determination. For me, it's more just the, I think what you said about it being inconsequential, that's where I see it. And so for me, it's if it's convenient for me to watch it, I've got nothing else going on at that moment, I'll do it, but I don't prioritize it.
Right. I think the tough part about following sports is, in order to really appreciate it, you kind of have to follow it. And it's time consuming to follow it. I mean,
yeah, it's an effort,
because in order to really appreciate it, you have to have context, and you have to know. So it's more fun if somebody wins and they haven't won in 12 years. It's fun to know that. And it's fun to understand the history.
No rivalries.
Right. So I like soccer, but I've only, in the last 10 years liked soccer. So I don't have any context. So when I'm watching a match between two, European teams, I don't have any of that history. I'm only watching it in real time as it pertains to now. And that's what I feel it must be like to be not somebody who doesn't follow sports, but watches sports from time. Your interest is only for that period of time that you're watching it. And there's something missing for me from that. Like I love this, but I'm jealous of the people that really love it. You know what I mean? Like, and I can never have that. Like, when I watch soccer, I could never be schooled on, what it's like to live in this town that never wins, and Leicester City, for example, won Premier League a few years ago. It's just like this small place that never wins. And I was happy for him, but I didn't really get it because I don't have that history or context.
You could just watch Ted Lasso. That would explain it all.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you watch the season 3 of Ted Lasso?
I did.
And did you like how it ended?
No, I wasn't really a fan of I think I'm like a lot of people where Ted Lasso was good at the beginning and kind of during COVID. It was a nice, during isolation, it was a nice little,
happiness bubble.
Yeah. And then I think I didn't enjoy it after that. Then I felt like I was just watching it to fill out the checklist, but it really grated on me. I really didn't like the show in the last season at all.
Well, I'll give you one more example of what you were just talking about that's interesting. We're on a bit of a tangent, but my wife and I watched it's called Drive to Win. It was a Formula One documentary on Netflix, and totally sparked an interest in Formula One for me. And I have had friends who are into it, really into it, who have told me how great it is, but they know who all the drivers are. They know the history of the teams. They know the sort of shenanigans that have gone on in the background and the cheating that's gone on and, all this stuff. And I was like, why would I want to invest in all that? After watching that show, though, it's so much more interesting now when I see a Formula One, I know who the driver is, and I appreciate it so much more than just guys I don't really care about going around a track.
Yeah, I think, and there's a lot to be said. And I love sports documentaries for that very reason. They fill in some of those blanks and give you context. And my favorite thing is to watch a documentary about somebody that I don't really like. And then at the end, I end up being like, man, that guy's pretty cool.
Yeah. Or even if they're not cool, you at least understand their motivation better.
Yeah, or respect them.
Yeah.
Or you go, wow, I understand why they won, but that guy would be a terrible friend or a husband or, whatever.
Podcast partner.
Yeah. So did you know that in 1975, Howard Cosell, like everybody in 1975, had a variety show?
No, I did not know that.
If you're younger than 35, you probably don't know about variety shows. But variety shows were these 1-hour TV shows back in the day where some famous person, maybe a singer, maybe an actress,
or a couple, Sonny
or
and
a couple,
Cher,
would have a bunch of music, comedy skits, general, just really cheesy, bad. I watch lots of them on YouTube now, from a safe distance,
like Hee Haw. Great
50
example.
or different distance. I just can't get enough of them now. But back in the day, I hated variety shows. But he had a variety show, and you know what it was called?
Cosell's Shenanigans.
No, it was actually called Saturday Night Live.
Really?
It came on a few months before the NBC show, and in fact, the NBC show had to be called Saturday Night because there was already a show called Saturday Night Live, hosted by Howard Cosell, and he had like Billy Crystal, Christopher Guest. The Bay City Rollers made their debut on Saturday because they have the song called Saturday Night.
Yeah,
and it was written for this Saturday
night.
Yeah, it was like this written for this Saturday Night Live Howard Cosell show.
Wow.
Well, this show was canceled after 3 months. Nobody was really. There was no demand for a Howard Cosell variety show.
And what year was that?
1975.
And then what year did the real Saturday Night Live start?
Same year, 1975.
How confusing that must have been.
I mean, like I said, they didn't call themselves Saturday Night Live until the second season.
Wow.
The one that we know now. So nobody knew that it should be called Saturday Night Live. But then in 1985, Howard Cosell actually hosted SNL. Here's a little clip. I've edited together a little bit of his monologue for you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Howard Cosell.
The applause, of course, is well taken. An extraordinary moment for all of you. And maybe in its own way, a felicitous and even rewarding moment for me. But I must tell you, not a fortuitous one. Yes, this is Saturday Night Live with Howard Cosell. Yeah. I would trust there are some among you who recall a primetime weekly television variety program that premiered on ABC TV back in 1975. It was called Saturday Night Live with Howard Cosell. It was a decade ahead of its time. It was a presentation wrought by superb craftsmen, conceived by knowing geniuses, performed by gifted artistes, and reviewed by licensed idiots.
That's awesome. So he was the host on SNL in 85?
Yeah, he was yeah.
Decade ahead of his time.
But you see, if you're not familiar with Howard Cosell, you can just see from that clip alone how kind of annoying he can be with his words and his just arrogance, and he just isn't at all the kind of characteristics that we find in likability. He doesn't have. He doesn't possess, and apparently he was that way in private life too. It's the way people that worked with him just called him an ass. Now, my favorite Howard Cosell endeavor was on a little show called Battle of the Network Stars.
I remember that.
Show?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, now what a great show that was. Now, to paint a picture for those of you who don't maybe know or remember what Battle of the Network Stars was, this took all of the stars from ABC, NBC, and CBS television shows at the time and put them in games and sporting events, pitted them against each other to have kind of a network that would win. It was, some would say, a way to get the female stars of the day in bathing suits, wet t-shirts, But as a youngster, I of course wasn't interested in that. Maybe a little interested in that. But they would have things like obstacle course and the dunk tank and tug of war, even things like Simon Says, swimming. It was just great TV. I can't explain, and there was only 3 channels at the time, and you just watched what was on. There was no like prestige TV.
What year was this?
Well, it was on from 76 to 88.
So really, it kind of got into the land of VCRs, because 76, there weren't VCRs.
Yeah.
Maybe 82, 83 is when that started being popular.
Although you can see some of this stuff out there on YouTube, and I may or may not have gone down a rabbit hole of Battle of the Network Stars in the last few days. There was 19, they did 19 of these Battle of the Network Stars.
Wow.
And they would usually have them like either in like Cancun, or the first few were over at Pepperdine and Malibu. And so there'd be all these TV stars at the time, and Howard said, "I'm the biggest star out here. They all want to be around me." That's what he thought the reason they all wanted to be on them. But you would have like the very first one for ABC. You would have like Gabe Kaplan from Welcome Back, Kotter.
Yeah.
Linda Carter from Wonder Woman. Farrah Fawcett, Ron Howard, and Penny Marshall. That was the ABC. That's a strong team right there.
That is a strong team. And Ron Howard went on to be so much more.
Yeah, of course.
And Penny Marshall as well. She was a director.
Yeah. And then the CBS team would have like Telly Savalas and Who Loves You, Baby? And Loretta Swit and Jimmy Walker from Good Times,
Loretta Swit. What was she on?
MASH.
Hot Lips Hooligan.
Houlihan, right. Right. And then the NBC nobody watched back then, and they would have like do you remember Robert Conrad?
Robert Conrad was the guy who put the battery on his shoulder.
Yeah,
I dare you to knock this off. Yeah, he was in Baba Black Sheep, right?
Yes. They would have Robert Conrad, Melissa Sue Anderson from Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah.
And then Damon Wilson from Sanford and Son.
Oh, yes.
Scott Baio was an obstacle course legend. He was like one of the all-time Battle of the Network star greats. Chachi from Happy Days.
Sure.
Future Battle of the Network stars would include Mr. T. So there's a great YouTube clip out there of Tug of War where Mr. T is really giving it his all. It's great. David Letterman participated in some of these. Heather Locklear and Robin Williams.
So these are more physical activity, like almost like a field day Olympics kind of thing.
Yep, field day is a good one.
Okay.
But then they would have things like the dunk tank too, where they would just be like, let's see Wonder Woman in a bathing suit, and but they would have things like swimming. They had the aforementioned Larry Holmes, it was Joe Frazier was in, and he didn't know how to swim, and he was in a swimming race, and he almost drowned.
Oh goodness!
In Battle of the Network Stars, yeah. But they would do the obstacle course is the main thing that everybody tuned in to see.
Wait, so did Cosell participate or announce this?
No, he would announce it, and he was very, he would announce it in just the way he announced it everything else. So it'd be like the 7th game of the World Series, and he would, it'd be Scott Baio versus Jimmy Walker in the obstacle course.
Dynamite.
Now, here's something about Howard Cosell that you may not know that might blow your mind. He is credited for popularizing nachos.
No.
So what happened was, even though nachos, the snack.
Well, hold on. Let's go back to the history of the tortilla chip, right? Doritos. That started at Disney, right?
Sure.
Does this tie into that?
Call back. No, not at all. Call back to the Disney episode. Sure. No, nachos were actually invented by a guy named Ignacio Anaya, nicknamed Nacho, in 1943. So they had been around in Mexico for a while. The Mexico-Texas border. It was kind of a Tex-Mex thing.
Really? So nachos weren't invented until the 40s. I thought that was like old school Latin American food, from way back in the day. Well,
they weren't called nachos if they were.
Okay.
And then in 1973, they started serving them at Texas Rangers games in Arlington, in the Dallas area. And then they figured out how to store the cheese sauce, which isn't really cheese, according to the FDA. And they really figured out how to kind of store it and keep it. And so they started selling those at Dallas Cowboy games.
We're talking about the pump here.
Yep, the pump.
Where you just pump it up and down, and it comes out like the perfect consistency. It's kind of like Elmer's glue,
but it's not at all like melted cheese.
No, because melted cheese will harden after a minute or two. Like if you leave it, you melt cheese in the microwave on top of chips, and then you leave it out, that cheese will turn back to solid.
Yeah, we're talking about ballpark nachos here. We're not talking about a nice plate of nachos in a Mexican restaurant. We're talking about ballpark nachos with cheap cheese and cheap chips. And so the Dallas Cowboys started selling in 1978 as a snack in the stands. And during a Cowboys-Colts game in 1978, the beginning of the season, they brought some of this exotic snack up to the booth. And Howard said, they brought us this new snack. What do they call them? Nachos? And they just got a kick out of that word. And then they started using that word like, hey, did you see that run? That was a nacho run. They just thought that word nacho was so funny. And then for the rest of the season, they kept using that word like, hey, that was a nacho pass. That was a nacho run. They just thought it was so funny. Well, by the next season, lots of ballparks in baseball and football started selling nachos because America wanted to see, they had been watching this on number one show on TV. They wanted some too. And that's how nachos, he just got a kick out of the name. He thought it was so funny. Once he learned that it wasn't called nachos.
That's awesome. and so, it goes back to the old joke when somebody's running away with your cheese, stole it from you, and you yell out, "That's nacho cheese."
Yeah. Is that an old joke?
I don't know.
Is that your joke?
No, I heard that as a kid.
So in 1985, I mentioned he was kind of 83. He was dismissed from from Monday Night Football. He wrote a book called "I Never Played the Game," and "I Never Played the Game" has kind of a double meaning. It means he wasn't a professional athlete, but it also means he never played the political game that a lot of people need to get ahead in the world of broadcasting. And this book was a book where he blasted a lot of his coworkers, just really unnecessarily, probably. It was, some described it as a bitter hate rant. It was like the end of his career. He had been let go a couple years earlier, and he was going to let it all off his chest. Well, that book, he was still doing baseball at the time. The book came out. They took him off the World Series, and not far after that, they fired him, kind of unceremoniously. 5 years later, in 1990, his wife died. They'd been married for 46 years, and then he just kind of faded away from the public eye. And then his health failed. He developed lung cancer in 1991, but also Parkinson's and heart disease and kidney disease. And finally he died in 1995 at the not too old age of 77.
Wow.
Having said all he had to say basically about sports. Now, the legacy of this guy, I think is pretty felt today. I mean, you have two networks, ESPN and FS1, the Fox equivalent of ESPN. And if you watch these shows during the day, it's all what they call a debate format. But it's basically two or more people just shouting at each other, disagreeing about any meaningless sports take. I think the legacy of Howard Cosell is that, to have a take, to have an opinion about something, and it doesn't matter if you're obnoxious about it, it's your take, so it's valid. Unfortunately, like you mentioned earlier, I think a lot of the producers of these shows have gotten jobs in news organizations, and this stuff has spilled over now into our TV news, which didn't really exist when Howard Cosell was there. There was the evening news, but we didn't have like cable news channels. So now pretty much you could turn your TV on to anything and if it's not a game or a show, it's people yelling about something, right?
Yeah.
It's people having an opinion, that everybody has an opinion, and everybody's opinion is considered equally valid, and people calling each other idiots and being. I think that might be kind of the legacy that he is unwitting. I don't think he would approve of this. I don't think he would like any of these shows, but I think this is kind of his legacy anyways, is that it's okay to be unpleasant on TV. As long as you say something that's provocative, people will listen. It's not really his legacy. It's the legacy of him, though. That makes sense. He didn't want to be this way. He didn't invent this as a shtick. It was him. But I think a lot of these people that do this stuff now are kind of trying to emulate who he was. And the idea of having an unlikable person on TV was probably pretty foreign before Howard Cosell came out. And now it's kind of commonplace.
There's one thing I wanted to say, going back to the name of his book. I love the name of that book.
I never played the game.
Yeah, it's a great name for a book I'd never heard of it, but yeah, what a great name for a book with the double meaning.
So yeah, that's Howard Cosell. When you picture him, do you picture him in his yellow blazer?
Yeah. No, I can see him in my head. Definitely with the headset on, and the little microphone, and kind of a cheesy smile on his face,
and his toupee, bad toupee,
his bad toupee. Yeah.
There's a great YouTube clip of him. There was a boxing match that he did where there was a melee, and it spilled out into the crowd, and his toupee comes off at one point. And in the video, it's like the Zapruder film where they slow it down and then they circle it, and you can see his toupee coming off, and he
back
grabs
into the
it
left,
and he grabs. You can see kind of his bald head, but he never went on TV with a bald head. That's for sure. He always had that toupee working for him.
He wore that toupee. Well, that's pretty awesome. No, I have one other quick story. When I was probably around 1980, so Billy Martin was the owner of the New York Yankees, right?
Steinbrenner was the owner of the.
Yeah, you're right. Steinbrenner. Was Billy Martin the manager? Okay.
Yep.
And he was fired like several times, right? And I was with my grandmother and my sister in Kansas City, and I guess it was a day that Billy Martin got fired, and Reggie Jackson got on an elevator with us. And my grandmother is a huge Royals fan, so she didn't like the Yankees, but she knew who Reggie Jackson was. And she told Reggie Jackson the way to get out of the Crown Center, which is where we were, the mall, the fancy shopping mall in Kansas City, how to get out of there without being seen by the press. So
nice. She
always likes to tell that story.
Was she frequently hounded by the press?
Yes, she knew the way out. Because they all knew that her grandson was destined for greatness.
Yeah, that's great.
25 years ahead of his time.
Well, that's a great story. The Bill and Martin, Reggie Jackson sagas were great too.
Because wasn't Cosell was kind of it? What was his big team, by the way? What was Cosell's favorite? Was he a Cubs fan?
I don't think he really was a fan. I mean, I think he was. If he was a fan of anybody, it would have been the Brooklyn Dodgers. Growing up in Brooklyn. But he didn't really, show favoritism of teams or anything.
Am I thinking of Harry Carey?
Oh yeah, you're thinking
Cubs fan. Okay,
yeah, Cubs fan and a Bud man.
Cubs fan, a big Bud man. Wow. Well, no, that was great. Name very much in line with the theme of this show. Someone I'd heard of, but really didn't know too much about.
All right, man. Well, that's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening, Kelly. And I'll see everybody next time on Dirt Nap City. Take care.
This has been a great show, and we really appreciate it. Take care.
Now I press stop.